Hey everyone, it's BB Miniatures here, and in this tutorial, we'll be painting up the new Tau Vesbid found in the new Kill Team starter set from Games Workshop. Before we jump straight into the painting process, it's good to gather some thoughts into what kind of colors we want to use in our paint scheme. Taking ideas from the box art with the main element of this fiery orange palette, I wanted to find some splashes of color that would complement the reddish orange of the exoskeleton. So, by taking a look at the color wheel, I decided to give my base my other spot colors in a form of a triad scheme, grabbing hues from both the blue-violet and yellow-green. Our blue-violet being used, I'm thinking of the more mechanical geometric parts of the gun as well as the ominous backpack device, be it we won't use it at full strength as to not make the model look like a party clown, but balancing off with a little more grays in there. And with our yellow green, we're going to go full strength on the smallest but most important elements of the eyes and the crystal barrel of the gun with a bit of a glow. This should, in theory, balance itself out and add some needed vibrancy to the scheme and give our tabletop gaming piece a nice little extra pop. This tutorial will be utilizing both brush and airbrush in the process. If you don't have an airbrush, we can replace those initial steps with fine applications of dry brushing through the color range as we would with the airbrush, and of course in the focused areas that you'll see, with our washes in the end or midway through to tie in all in with a similar colored effect. But with that little primer out of the way, let's just get stuck right into it and let's get painting. All right, so we're jumping straight into it with our assembled and primed Vespid miniature on here, and we're going to start off with the airbrush right away, and we are going to be using wine red from AK. I'm using a Harder Steinbeck Evolution CR Plus with a 0.4 needle, and all of the airbrushing here will be done closely, or the majority of it, unless I state it, will be done at around 2 bars, so around 28 psi, and with a general mixture of a 1-to-1 ratio of paint to airbrush thinner. Now, I always recommend using an acrylic thinner that is a direct association with the brand of paint they're using. So right here, I'm using AK's acrylic thinner. And they're all formulated, all the different acrylic paints are formulated a little bit differently, and it's always safer, and I find you mostly get the best results when just using the paired thinner to acrylic paint or the brand that you're using. I'm just going to go in here and just give a couple of a few coats. Now, I should have actually done a pre-illumination with white. That would probably make this red layer just a little bit easier, or priming in gray. But if you're going to do it in black like I did, it'll probably take around 2 nice thin passes to get the desired opacity and saturation you need. If you enjoyed and found this tutorial helpful, why not take a look into my Patreon? In there, I have over 200 hours of video tutorials ranging from Games Workshop's Warhammer 40k, Horus Heresy, Age of Sigmar, Old World, Busts, and other game systems, and everything in between. All suited for both tabletop and display level painting, with many projects broken up into multi-part series covering a wide variety of techniques, and even an ongoing series of fundamentals focused on teaching you essential skills to empower your creativity. It's also the best way to be part of my Discord community and support what I love to do for a living. All that sharing my knowledge and passion for this wonderful hobby and art form. Of course, your support is also felt with a like on this video, as well as subscribing if you haven't already, and leaving a comment or a painting question below. Alright, I'm done with the YouTube plug. Let's just get back to the painting. And that's what it looks like when it is dry, getting that and doing your best to get the coverage on there. The next color up, we're going to be using some Evil Sun Scarlet by Citadel. Now, the Citadel paint doesn't have its own acrylic thinner, so what I like to use in substitution, and works really well, is Tamiya's X20A thinner. Watch out when you're using this thinner with AK paints in particular because of the, yeah, there's like a weird, unique chemical reaction that can happen at times with AK paints and Tamiya's thinner, which will kind of turn it out like goop. So, but with the Citadel paints, you're fine. And I find it's a really good thinner for the Citadel paints. What I'm doing here, of course, is with the airbrush, you can see that we're kind of aiming at, 45 degrees, not directly downwards like the zenithal word implies, but you get the idea. We want the light to come from above. And for this first stage of highlight, I'm not going to be narrowing my band of specific spots that we're going to be highlighting, but I just want to get a fairly good overall coverage from everything that is above. So, just don't point the airbrush from a downwards angle shooting up into the Vesbid. Always use your airbrush generally pointing in a downwards direction. 45 degrees or straight down is fine. And what the difficult thing here is between these two colors, they're fairly they look fairly close in value on the model, but what we're looking for right away is with that wine red that has a little more of a cooler, a darker and cooler tone of red in here. This Evil Sun Scarlet is, making it warmer. So we're already getting a little bit of a temperature variation. And you can see I'm hitting almost all the areas here along the Vesbid, as long as it's in a downward angle. And we get this sort of finish when it's nice and dry. Next color, Wild Rider Red. Same dealy. So, thinning out with Tamiya's X20A. And this one is going to be substantially brighter. So this is where I'll start to use the airbrush, and I am going to be concentrating all my highlights on the upper 2/3 of the model. So everything from the head, shoulders, arms, and then the furthest I really go down with these highlights is the Vesbid's kneecaps. And I would also say the thorax, the big butt of the of the Vesbid. And of course, I'm getting along the wings. Bonus points if we concentrate the highlight more towards the center of the body. And as you can see how it, along the edges of the wings as it fans out, it kind of starts to fade away. And this color is the really one that we can see the value that's really pushing it here. And speaking of value pushes, the final one is Pastel Peach. So this one again, we're going to be focusing mainly on the head, the arms, and depending on which model, some of the models have like their knees a little bit raised. Maybe I'll hit a little bit with this. But this is where I'm also going to start separating the highlights. So you're going to see little like spherical lights onto here. So the main part is when doing the head, I aimed more of the highlight towards its eyes, not necessarily the very top of the cone of the head. I'd rather have the light towards the eyes because that gives a little more attention directly to the character. And then on the arms, we have 3 specific joints. We have the shoulders, we have the elbows, and the hands. So leaving little pauses in between each of those stems there, just so we have the highlights on those 3 elements. You can see a little bit on the knee. This is me just showing you a few other models I was doing. Even though while this video is completed, I am still going through and finishing off the rest of the unit. But I try to get all the airbrushing stage unified, all done together. Even though I made a dumb mistake that I completely forgot one Vesbid, so I gotta go back and do another one. But hopefully that gives you an idea right here and sees what's going on. Next off is after we do all this airbrushing, we're going to knock some of these colors down and kind of bring a little more richness back to the painting. We're going to be using some Games Workshop contrast paint. So this is one of my favorite contrast paints, Dark Oath Flesh. And I'm just putting it in a little dish here and taking some technical contrast medium and making a rough 50-50 mix. Pouring it into there maybe is more accident prone, just be careful. Or maybe you can just use a brush or even a pipette to take the paint and put it in the dish This is so that, have a little bit of a mixture so the contrast paint is not super heavy in staining. Now, the nice things about the contrast wash is that, well, instead of just working with enamels or oils, this stuff will dry substantially faster. But we do, have a shorter working time, a lot longer than using like a general acrylic wash. But just to be aware that, we have about a 10-minute window in order to use it. So I'm just giving a fairly even coat all the way through on the model, making sure the wash reaches all the crevices and the recesses, of course, importantly. And once I get this all down, I'm going to shortly rinse my brush, and that's when I'm going to start doing just a little bit of cleanup, as you can see here. See, I'm just brushing off a little bit of the excess buildup that's mainly on the highlights. This is just to protect our highlight work so it doesn't get completely dulled down. So, so we don't lose all that highlight work that we did before. It'll dull down a little bit and we'll be getting back into the optional highlighting brush stages. But after the contrast wash, I think it just looks pretty solid. It looks pretty nice after that dark oath flesh. And just to give a little bit more color variation, we're going to be using this some some shades from AK. They operate very similarly to Games Workshop's contrast paint, but I've never tried the purples that they have with Games Workshop. I have these AK versions, and they work just as well. So I'm just taking this Invocation purple, and I'm only going to wash the lower third of the model. So pretty much just the lower legs just below the kneecap, and the lower part of the thorax. As well as I'll actually wash this purple here on the wings as well. A thing that I noted when I was using this is that once it dries, and you've probably seen the finished images, is that this purple is not very strong. It's not a very strong saturated purple at all, but it does give a little bit of variation into our color scheme, which I'm like, that's what we want. We want to give a little bit of little more interest into the scheme, while also trying to keep it simple enough so we can get a model ready for the tabletop in a decent amount of time. Next off is the brush highlights. Now, the three colors that we have on here are pretty much the same that we are using our airbrush. So we have from left to right, that is a Wild Rider red, and then the pastel peach, and the white on there is like ivory. So just mixing those three together, and we'd be just using that small little scale to paint on some extra highlights. So yeah, pretty much we'd be tracing what we've done with the airbrush. But the nice thing about putting the highlights with the brush here is that our highlights are going to gain a little bit more power and a little more prominent, especially since we've done the wash, which really nicely tied together a lot of the previous layers, which looks fine. But I like to do a little bit of extra brush work just to get our highlights to pop a little bit stronger. But if you were doing like a whole army, and you have like a lot of Vespids to go through, or maybe you just like the little more muted without so much edge highlighting and such, we can skip this stage if you want to. But I like to add it because I like to add a little bit extra of highlight and dynamic range of the model, and like stuff like this like makes the model pop a little bit more. And also, just for the fact is where we're going to be placing these highlights. Again, we're only be placing on the upper third or the upper half of the model. So I'm just picking out the most prominent areas of the Vespid to really give highlights. You know, I'm not going to go and highlight every single edge and every single piece of armor, or I don't know, what do you call it? It's got like it's an insect, you know. I forgot the name of it, you know, the skeletons on the outside. But to give the big highlights mainly on the shoulder areas in particular, these nice spherical points, it's really all about brush direction. So just having your paint slightly diluted, so you're not using super thin, super thick or just thicker paint. You know, by diluting around to like around a 1-to-1, 1 part water to 1 part paint, or as I like to do it, especially when I'm painting in the summer, when the wet palette will actually, you know, dry up faster, or our paints will dry up faster, is when I'm rinsing my brush, instead of drying it completely on a paper towel, I'll just dab it once on the paper towel to keep a lot of the moisture in the brush. And then when picking up your paint from the palette, the paint is already becoming diluted in the brush itself. These will vary, of course, from brush to brush, but because just due to the size of the brush. So if we're using a larger brush like I'm using here, I'm using a Raphael number 1 8408. It's got a bigger, you know, it's a little bit larger brush. It's got a bigger belly, but still comes to a point. But the size of the belly is very important because it actually can retain more moisture. If we were using a Artist Opus 00, for instance, that is a much smaller brush and doesn't retain a lot of moisture at all due to the small size. So our brush marks, if used in this way, would just be a little bit more drier, and we wouldn't get the soft fade. Speaking of with the dilution of there, all my brush strokes, I'm always trying to paint towards the light. And this is just due to how like paint dries and how it's dispensed through the brush. You know, think of it as we're manipulating a little puddle, and wherever our brush stroke ends, deposits a little bit of extra paint, where the start of our stroke will just be a little bit softer. And that difference can mean all the change when we want to give the, you know, a sort of blended look without actually blending between two colors, going back and forth. We can just use our direction to give a fairly a start to the blend. And you know, for tabletop stuff, I think this is more than adequate. But you can see near the end of our brush blending stage, I will actually just use an optional glaze just to show you if you've made the highlight too big or you want to knock it down. We could use something. We could use a little glaze to tidy it up. But as you can notice here with the knee, I'm just doing the same form of highlighting, but yet with a lower value. So instead of adding in that final so much ivory, you know, this is more of just almost the wild rider red with a little with the pastel peach in there, just because I just want to, of course, illustrate the knee is in a lower position than on the shoulder or the head. So we just get a little bit of that nice natural effect of the light falling and produce a nice little effect that we can see on the tabletop. Same thing here, just grabbing some highlight, and we're just going to make the each of the stems of the Vespid's wings pop out a little bit more, just to catch some of that detail. Nothing too fancy, just using the side of the brush to run along the length of it and just catch the highlights there. Finding the angle on these wings was, I would want to point the brush down just so, because I'm watching out where the tip of the brush is actually going to be hitting. I think on a few of them I accidentally get the odd stroke on the inside or the membrane part of the wing, but really, you know, it didn't really make too much of a difference. And you know, you can almost, as long as you're fairly, you know, generally neat about it, I don't think you can get away with it. It'd be fine. Here we go with the weapon. So to complete that, to the second part of our triad color scheme is going to be a form of bluish purple, and this is where I'm going to be using the gun to be painting it with, be it with adding in more gray. So, you know, this is our blue violet mixed with some dark gray and, you know, just a pinch of black, and just going to give the gun a base coat. And moving forward, when we're going to be painting the gun here, I'm just going to show you the one side because it's completely the same. You flip it on the other. It's a mirror image. So just adding a little more blue violet into the mix, and I'm going to be starting to highlight the gun. The first sets of highlights are really going to be focusing on mainly all the paneling of the weapon, and I'm going to try to avoid painting in the recesses as much as possible. Funny thing, I noted that I actually assembled this model a little bit wrong. So that's a tutorial on not how to assemble it. I forgot, actually, while looking at this footage now and cutting it for you guys, is I forgot the last piece on his chest that also contains the 2 additional arms. Because initially there's this part on the gun that's sticking upwards, so it's right by his hand, and it's going in the opposite direction of the grip. I thought that was some sort of like funky antenna for for this gun. I don't know, it's on an insectoid with, you know, wings and holding a Tau rifle. But I actually found out later, I was looking through the pictures, I was like, oh, that's actually supposed to be his secondary smaller appendages, and one of them is like resting its hand on the top of the rifle. So yeah, that should be part of his skin and not the gun. So don't follow my example there. But moving back into the gun, you can see that now I'm going to be starting to paint all the major panels in this first highlight here. And just with a general indicated that I want the light to gather more at the top of the rifle and towards the front, which you're going to see in a little bit as I progressively give a few more highlights into this weapon. And even for painting the ammunition, that sphere, same thing as you got to see the brushstroke directions, you know. If I want the light to gather down the center, I'm just pulling all the brushstrokes to the center. So again, you know, leaving just a little bit of a softer transitional point, but, you know, not looking for like a buttery, like lost transition. You know, we're not painting a competition golden demon model here. We're looking at for the tabletop. So, you know, we still want to get there. Like, I'm still doing the highlights to get the dynamic range that we want, but, you know, it doesn't have to be as critically smooth and perfect, especially as we're reviewing this as a squad. And, you know, we're going to be rolling dice around it. It's not, you know, not for competition, I should say. You should be a little bit looser. Enjoy yourself. There we go. You know, I think pretty self-explanatory. Just add a little more purple into the mix. Now we're getting closer to that. Now we're getting closer to that blue violet, that really nice blue violet color. And again, I'm going to be focusing all the light towards the upper edges, so all the upwards facing edges in here, and you know, just respecting a little bit more the volume. So trying to leave a little bit of space in between each of the layers to just show that progression. Again, that cylinder, this is what I mean by, like, you know, trying to gather the light straight down the center of the cylinder there to give ourselves a little illustration of the volume a little bit better. And as like I was just even thinking, if you want an optional version with these similar colors, but maybe not as technically demanding on the brush, you know, we could have just painted this with like a mixture of the blue violet and a little bit of gray. And then, you know, if you wanted to, you can always give it a wash. Maybe something I don't know, using a very, very dark wash in there. I don't know. I forgot the names of all the Games Workshop's contrast washes and such. But then you can always go back and just do an edge highlight. This just gives us a little more. I like to do, a little bit of painting. I don't like just to wash everything all the time as much as, it is for army and stuff. But, giving myself a little bit of different, different looks within parts of the model, I think is important and keeps me from going, keeps it a little more interesting for me. But as the final highlight, I can just mix in some of that ivory into our previous mixture. And now this is just these edge highlights. We're just going to be focusing on right on the edges of the gun and just outlining those final details that are on the sculpt. And with these edge highlights here, to get a nice crisper edge highlight, make sure, we don't need too much dilution, and we don't want to have a lot of moisture in our brush like in the previous stages, or the way that we're also using that to highlight the skin or the exoskeleton. That's the word I was looking for earlier. To get a stronger edge highlight, we pretty much want to use like no dilution paint, just so we get a nice crisp, easy line. The only thing you just have to watch out for is just the control of the amount of charge, the amount of paint that we're picking up. If you're prone to getting larger blobs of paint, or you find like edge highlighting like always creeps out, a good rule of thumb is to, pick up the amount of paint that you want, but run a stroke or two along your thumb. That's why my thumb always has paint marks on them, or on your paper towel they're using to dry, just to rub off the excess charge. A good rule of thumb is that all the paint should be contained within the brush. So if you see like a layer of paint that looks like that's breaking the thin tapered silhouette of your brush, that's an indication that you possibly have too much paint loaded in your brush at that time. And the final optional stage is, I'll clean up some overbrush marks just with a little bit of black, or you can get fancy. I just put a little bit of gray in there so it's not, jet black. I find that sometimes can be a little bit harsh if I'm not using pure black anywhere else on the model, and they only appear within the lines of the gun. But yeah, get the idea. Last colors down there, we're getting some Caliban green, and then some deep green and pistachio, and this is going to complete the triad, our triad paint scheme, by adding in some yellowish green. So now we can see how our prominent orangey red, with a little bit of purple, and then our green is going to be quite strong. Now it's only a small areas of the model that are going to be green, but they're pretty powerful. And in the gun, I kind of like this, I don't know, looks like some sort of crystal gun. But I like this yellowish green that we're going to be putting in here is going to nice contrast with the purple gun, or the purplish gray gun of the housing. And I think they look great together. So you can kind of see the paint mixtures here. We're pretty much like doing it almost in three stages, getting that Caliban green in, and then the deep green mixing in. And here I have made this mixture into a thin glaze just by watering down a little bit extra paint in here, and like just painting on the outsides. And if you can see how I'm pulling the paint towards the edge, or towards the crystals themselves, that's going to give us a little bit of a nicer fade, and just give us a little bit of the illusion that we want these crystals, give it a little bit of glow. Why not? Don't always need an airbrush to do that kind of stuff. You could do it if you wanted to, but I find the brush is faster. I don't have to prep the airbrush, and I don't have to worry about possible spatter and, chunky overspray, which can happen sometimes, which is really annoying. And finally, we're just gonna mix in some pistachio. This is one of my favorite colors from AK. It's a great, unique tool, and I don't and nice yellowish green. And we're gonna be again reinforcing those edge highlights to produce the glow. The power on this color is fairly weak. It is not a super strong color, so expect 2 coats. So I did 2 passes of this highlight, moving around all the edges and the tips of each crystal. And at the very end, highlighting with pure pistachio. Just doing little dots onto there, keeping it control. Try to bring the light towards the very the end of the gun as much as you can. And then we can finish that off again by just giving a little bit extra attention to the edges of the gun. Remember to get both sides, the top and the bottom. Boom. That's looking pretty sweet. The eyes initially I painted purple, but later on I'll go back and change them to green. But let's get the basing over and done with. Let's keep the basing scheme really simple. I have a couple of different tubs of dirt. This is my like mishmash from I used an old tub from Games Workshop, as well as 2 different types of glue. I got just white PVA glue, which I'm putting down right here, and then the other one is I have a sand and gravel fixer, which I'll show you how we can combine these two to effectively, put together a really solid base, but it's also nice and fast. So the initial PVA glue that I'll put on here, and then I'll just shake off some of the dirt, and this will just help the initial stuff stick to the area. And I'll be using the coarser grain, so this is that mystery stuff, or the mystery bucket. And then this AK Desert Soil is really nice, is because it comes with some really fine sand in here, like really, really fine grains of sand, and with a few chunks of larger stuff. And you don't have to add the second one in, but I quite like it just because it gives me a little more variation of texture on your base. And to seal that the finer sand in particular, as well as it helps seal in the first layer of sand, I'm using the gravel and sand fixture and using a pipette. This stuff's like very liquidy, and it'll take I'd say it takes an hour or 2 to cure. And I was just using a Q-tip to clean up the excess. And when that's all dry, you can see it dries like perfectly clear, which is really nice. Also a good tip, it's really good to you could use it for like leaves and static grass and all that kind of stuff, so it works really well. But to paint the base, I'm taking a burnt umber from Scale 75 Artist Series. So it comes as a thicker tube paint. We just need to water it down a little bit. After that entire base is painted with that burnt umber, we're just going to get some dry pigments. Now I have some sienna pigments as well as a gray, and all we're going to do is take a shitty brush, as you can definitely see from the condition of my brush that I'm using. It's hella garbage. But hey, I can use I'll find a use for any worn out destroyed brush. And I'm going to use this and just grabbing those 2 pigments and just, just going to town at the base, letting these 2 colors mix. So letting the sienna and the gray slate mix together. That gray slate is actually from a really old company, Secret Weapon Miniatures. I know they're not around anymore, but, I'm not going to buy new pigment just for the sake that it's not out of stock. You can just get any other, neutral gray pigment out there. I know like companies like Vallejo and MIG and stuff like that all sell it. So, if you're trying to follow the recipe and you're going like crazy saying, I need to find the secret weapon pigment, don't bother. Just grab a regular one that's out now. And to seal, sorry, and to seal this, to seal the pigment and the miniature together, I'm just using a varnish through the airbrush. I'm using MIG Ammo's matte varnish. Now, this is the only time where I'm going to change the PSI. So I'm going to slam the PSI on my airbrush all the way down to like 15, 16 PSI. And this is just so that I don't blow all the pigment away. A little bit will get blown off the base. You can't help it. But the majority of it will stay in there. It'll get sealed. It'll get, it instantly starts to get pinned by the by the varnish, and you'll have a nice finished model. As a bonus, I just kept all the basing together. As you can see, we've kind of jumped back in time on bonus land here, but this is just me doing some freehand now, just as a creative outlet. Like I wanted to keep the paint scheme pretty simple. As you can see, like the bug itself, the Vesbid itself, is pretty monochromatic. He's mostly just of that one color, with some variations of, like we did on the previous steps, with a little bit of purple and then like a little bit of a temperature variation and make it look dynamic. But to give a little bit extra character and to show how much the Tau Empire really appreciates all of their auxiliary troops, I decided to give all the Vesbids numbers on their forehead. So they're less more like, numbered conscripts than they're willing to fight for the greater good. I don't know too much about the Tau lore, but I do know they're everyone always says they're like, oh, they're space communists, or they employ multiple different species within their empire. But I like to think of them, maybe they're just like not too much greater than the Imperium. So they'll just, tattoo marks on their head to signify, instead of trying to pronounce their names, which I bet the Vesbid don't even, maybe are not the most audible language anyway. They're probably a bunch of clicks and weird sounds. But yeah, I thought putting the numbers on their foreheads, and you can find it on the internet. I found, I think it's taken from one of the Tau codexes. They show like the general, their phonic alphabet, and then their number system. So this guy has the number 14 put on his head. So all of them will have various numbers on them, just to show them how much scum they are. And yeah, that's it. Thanks again for joining me on this tutorial. I hope you found this, this paint scheme nice and, simple but very effective for your Vesbid kill team, and hope you have a lot of fun with them on the tabletop. Thanks again for joining me. And of course, near the beginning of the video, if you really enjoyed it, please, like and subscribe. And if you have any comments or you have any questions about it, please feel free to leave it in the comments. And of course, if you want to, watch more of my tutorials, you want more in-depth and higher display painting tutorials, make sure to come check me out on my Patreon, where I offer a lot more in-depth guides and tutorials and, multi-part projects for you to check out and to learn. Thanks again for joining me, and we will catch you in the next one. Take care and happy painting.